Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I am Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
Michael, a pleasure to be with you again this week. A special guest this week, one whose name, if you've been in Florida for a while, you may recognize, Kendall Coffey. He was, for several years, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. This was during the time of the Elian Gonzalez case. He is still active. He is one of the most famous lawyers in South Florida, and he also worked with Brett Kavanaugh. Stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages.
Terrorist acts and shootings are often described as great tragedies. They are not. We live in a world so concerned with being politically correct that they're afraid to call evil what it is, evil. Man's sin nature is as old as the Garden of Eden. Many love to blame culture, poverty, or lack of education and opportunity as the problem. They may have a good or bad impact, but the big problem is sin. Acknowledging our sin nature will show us our need for a Savior who changes us from within. That Savior's name is Jesus. He came to die for the sins of all who will acknowledge their sin. Faith in Him strikes a mighty blow at evil. So quit calling man's evil acts a tragedy. They are evil and God hates it. Yet thankfully He loves us in spite of our evil and sin. Jesus not only forgives us, but gives us the want to overcome evil with good. This is Brian Wright, speaking right from my heart.
Unexpected expenses can hit anyone, and many Floridians turn to small dollar loans to manage those temporary financial challenges. When using a small dollar loan, be sure to choose a state licensed lender. Remember that borrowers have rights under Florida law, including flexible repayment options if you can't repay on time. Make sure you understand the cost and terms of the loan before you borrow, and only borrow what you can afford to pay back. For more information, go to borrowsmartfl.com. This message is brought to you by the Florida Community Financial Services Association.
Hi, Darcy the cow here for Black Cow, the mature manure. Most good gardeners know how to get great results. Sun, water, and fertilizer, along with the right soil. Cow manure is the best way to condition the soil. Black Cow is all natural, and it's the best fertilizer, with 10 times more manure and 10 times more nutrients than the other guys. Pick up the bright yellow bag today.
Black Cow, the mature manure. Black Cow.
This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
A pleasure to be with you this week, Mike, again. And a little bit later on in the hour, we're going to be joined by Kendall Coffey. He is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He, since 2009, has been serving on the Federal Judicial Nominating Commission for South Florida. And very well versed in much of the famous events of the last, I almost hate to say it, 25, 30 years of Florida history, but he's been a key player statewide. One of the things I want to talk about before we get to those things, Mike, though, is that in recent days, the Democratic National Committee is making movements to change the rules of their national convention and how the voting takes place.
Well, yeah, they're pretty much getting rid of the power of the superdelegates, which was a big deal in the past two presidential elections. Well, really, Barack Obama versus Hillary. Obama got a lot of superdelegates, which hurt Hillary. But when Hillary came along versus Bernie Sanders, Hillary got a lot of the superdelegates, which hurt Bernie Sanders. And a lot of people think the system is kind of unfair.
And so the people that control the national levers are talking about tinkering with that system.
Well, basically what they're doing now is the superdelegates would not have the power in the first vote at the convention.
Yeah, and that's a big deal.
Yes, because usually that's the one that decides it nowadays.
And for those of you who don't know, a superdelegate is a Democrat office holder or longtime prominent Democrat,
and they're basically not bound.
Right. The governor of New York automatically, he doesn't have to be chosen by any election or electoral district to represent his party at the convention. If you're an elected official, a Democrat, a governor, a congressman, a senator, you're going.
Yep.
And they are the superdelegates.
And they're not bound by what their state
does. Yeah.
So if their state voted for Bernie Sanders, they could still vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yes. And what they're saying now is that those people who automatically get to go do not get to vote on the first round of balloting.
Yeah.
And I do believe that would have made a difference in the Clinton-Sanders race.
Yeah, it would have been a lot closer. There's no doubt about that.
Whether it would have forced a second round or not, I don't remember the numbers that well. But I know it would have been a lot closer, and Hillary would certainly not have had the comfortable lead that she enjoyed as she corralled these superdelegates. So.
And it was kind of the same way when Obama was running against Hillary back in 2008, because Obama was getting a lot of the superdelegates, and Hillary thought that was unfair to her.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, well, we'll see what happens with that. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court and the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. But as I was kind of ruminating about the Supreme Court and political influence on the Supreme Court, I thought back to it, and the most egregious event of a president tampering with the Supreme Court came during, as James Buchanan was coming into office. And the court was 7-2 Democrat. It was controlled by Southerners and slave owners. And the president went and lobbied a Supreme Court member from Pennsylvania to vote in a certain way. And then he went in his inaugural address and said, the Supreme Court is going to announce this in just a couple of days, blah, blah, and this is all going to be solved.
Oh, wow.
Now, don't you think if that happened today, the first word out of many people's mouth would be impeachment?
Yeah.
James Buchanan got away with it. Nobody talked about throwing him out of office, and he tampered with the court. It is a historical known fact. And as I say, probably the most egregious in our entire history.
And one of the most, sounds like it.
There's one for you to go look up and do some reading on this week. That's your assignment for the week.
Yep, I will.
To do that. Well, we're going to pause along the network line here. We'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. We're a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
Kendall Coffey, the former attorney, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, will join us as the conversation continues.
One time he forgot to fuel up the boat. And it wouldn't be the first time he left his tackle box behind. On one trip he even headed out without his lucky hat. And seems he almost always forgets to wear his sunscreen. But he never forgets to wear the one thing that could save his life. Life jackets save lives. Wear it, Florida.
Visit myfwc.com for more information.
Your yard's days of being picked on are over, thanks to the science of Behr Advanced Brush Killer Plus. Its penetrating formula is specifically designed to kill hard-to-control brush, like kudzu, poison ivy, poison oak, and wild berries, roots and all. And the concentrate product even kills stumps, so your yard never has to worry about being bullied. Behr Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. BehrAdvanced.com. Always read and follow label directions.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Wow, your flowers are gorgeous. What's your secret?
It's no secret. It's Bear Advanced.
You mean these blue bottles?
Uh-huh. I protect my beauties with all-in-one rose and flower care. It's insect and disease control plus fertilizer.
Really? What's this 12-month tree and shrub protect and feed?
Oh, I use it on my trees. It kills bugs for up to a year, plus it feeds. It's that easy. Hey, where are you going?
To get my own. I want a great yard, too.
Bear Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. Always read and follow label instructions.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And Michael, as promised, we are off to South Florida today to visit with one of the most well-known attorneys in South Florida. He is a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And we want to welcome to the Florida Roundtable Kendall Coffey. And Kendall, it's nice to have you with us today, sir.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Now, if memory serves, you were the attorney for the Southern District of Florida beginning in 1993, I believe.
Yeah,
is that about right?
93 to 96, which were still the days of active, very active drug cartels and battling the cartels in the war against drugs.
Yes. We want to get to that and kind of pick your brain a little bit on that, too. But before we get started, for those around the rest of the state who may not be familiar with you, a little bit of background. My memory is telling me that you are a native Floridian, but I'm
pretty close to it. Elementary, high school down here passes for native Floridians since there's so many newcomers throughout Florida, but I've been here a long time, seen a lot of the changes, and I like to think I'm a pretty good salesperson for South Florida. Whenever I talk to people about Florida generally or South Florida specifically, there's just so many great things to describe. And by the way, if you enjoy legal cases or political controversies, we've got plenty of those too in Florida.
Yes, we do. And you have been involved in some of the biggest ones who had national prominence. You were there during the days of Elian Gonzalez, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, 2000 was one of the most intense years for South Florida when you look at legal and political dynamics. Of course, the Elian Gonzalez case was a huge event, had international attention, involved what was, I think, seen as a custody fight over a 6-year-old boy who miraculously survived the sinking of the ship that had left Cuba for South Florida and it lost his mother at sea. He miraculously survived, was originally entrusted by the government to his Miami relatives, but then Castro started protesting. Issues got controversial, and from there, a big court battle ensued, which is, as we know, culminated in the return of Elian to Cuba. But along the way, there was a raid, which I've described as a paramilitary raid by U.S. law enforcement to extract Elian from the home in Little Havana, and that became a source of great distress throughout the Cuban-American community, that in the dark of night, while we're attempting to negotiate with the Department of Justice, a paramilitary team came in and extracted Elian amidst tear gas and heavily armed agents. That created significant ill will in the Cuban-American community, including among Cuban Democrats. And a lot of analyses would say that when we talk about how close Florida was in 2000, the submicroscopic margin, that the thousands of votes that the Democrats lost in the among Cuban Democrats in the Miami area was enough to tip the margin and change history. And by swinging the election to George W. Bush.
Boy, and there's another whole show because you were on the Al Gore legal team. But I wanted to go back, if memory serves, and again, I was in the newsroom in Orlando, the Florida Radio Network, as it was known in those days. But if I recall properly, another prominent Floridian was very much involved in that Elian Gonzalez case. And that is the former attorney of Miami-Dade County, who Bill Clinton made the attorney general, being the late Janet Reno.
Yeah, the late Janet Reno was attorney general at the time. She was well regarded and very, very popular in South Florida, and very, very well regarded among Cuban Americans. And I think it was a painful ordeal for her. And indeed, she was on the phone negotiating with our team. We were in the Little Havana household, and she was on the line negotiating with one of the representatives during the time that the raid was launched. And I know that was she, of course, felt she was doing the right thing, but I know it was very, very painful for her personally. And there was a lot of moments throughout that ordeal that where she had to, basically come into conflict with a Cuban American community that she'd been very close to before.
What do you think should have been done differently then?
Well, my view was pretty consistent. It was the same view that was adopted by then candidate George W. Bush and then Vice President Al Gore. And that view was that rather than have the fate of Elian Gonzalez determined in the immigration process, that there should have been a determination of the best interests of the child in a family court. And, of course, the best interests of a child weigh heavily in favor of the wishes of a natural father. So there's no question that in that process, the wishes and the position of Juan Miguel Gonzalez would have gotten great importance, but it wouldn't have been the only consideration because obviously, as we had predicted, when Elian was taken back to Cuba, he became a trophy for the Castro regime and lived a very unusual life in Cuba. We would have liked the opportunity to have have all that considered, of course, obviously, with great respect for the rights of the father. But that didn't happen. And I say it's ironic that that position, the best interests of the child being determined in a proper judicial forum, was one of the things that George W. Bush and Al Gore agreed upon.
I'm listening and we're asking you the questions. And I think what we have to do, because we have a whole lot of things we want to get to in this hour, but we need to have you come back, and we can do. We could probably do a whole day just of your historical involvement in famous cases through South Florida in those years. So, but I wanted to ask you about now. Since 2009, you have been active, and it is a South Florida Federal Judicial Selection. The name of the commission and what you're doing with that.
The nominating commission. Yeah, during. The 2009 to 2016, I was the chair of the South Florida Federal Judicial Nominating Commission. Now I'm a member. There's a different chair, but it's a great tradition, a bipartisan tradition that Florida has, so that federal judges and U.S. attorneys are recommended to the president through a bipartisan, but really I think nonpartisan process where applicants interview. The commission votes after interviewing and considering a lot of information and recommends individuals to the president. That's not required. In the good old days, the U.S. senator who was aligned with the president's party would simply make recommendations to the president. And for federal district judges, that was considered a matter of senatorial prerogative. I clerked for a federal judge some years ago, and part of the reason he became a federal judge, he was a great guy, but he was the college roommate of the senior senator from the state of Georgia. So that's how a lot of things worked then, and then it's moved to much more of a merit basis now. I think Senators Connie Mack and Bob Graham really began the process. But throughout the years, Republican and Democratic senators of Florida have worked together through this nominating commission, and they participate in selecting the members together. And then the senators interview the applicants and forward names to the president. It's a real treasure that Florida has such a strong tradition of bipartisan cooperation with respect to picking U.S. attorneys and picking federal judges. We all know how very, very important that is.
And so does the president usually keep within those recommendations, have you found?
The president has for many, many years. The current nominees that President Trump submitted in South Florida were all names that had been recommended by the nominating commission.
Now, as a body of this commission, do you meet and hold hearings and do interviews, or do candidates nominees submit the resumes and things like that? How does that work?
Well, all of the above. Now, it's not regulated by statute. The two senators agree on a set of rules. But we do have like a set of rules that we follow. And the process is that a vacancy will be announced. Applicants can submit an application. There's a form for the application. It's very, very detailed. And then the nominating commission will select those who are to be interviewed. And the interviews are public, open to the public. And sometimes members of the media join us for the interviews of the applicants, many of whom, almost all of whom, have very distinguished careers, and many of whom are currently judges in the state system or federal magistrates. The deliberations themselves are confidential. And then the commission votes, and the names go to the senators, and then the senators determine which of those names should be recommended to the president for appointment for an Article III federal judge, which, as we know, is a lifetime, very, very powerful and important position.
Have there been any nominees that have sort of stood out to you in the recent past?
Well, I'm a practicing lawyer, so I got to tell you, they're all great. We're very proud of the work that's been done. I tell you, every time I look at a federal judge in our district, I'm very proud of our judiciary. And of course, that's an easy thing to say, but it also happens to be a truthful thing to say.
Now, how did you happen to end up on this commission?
Well, the individuals on the commission are picked by the senators. And the senator whose party is in the White House, which from 2009 to 2016 was the Democratic Senator Bill Nelson, makes the majority of the selections. But the other senator, which in recent times has been Marco Rubio, also makes a significant number of selections. And now that there's a Republican president, the way the system works is Senator Rubio makes a majority of appointments, but Senator Nelson also makes appointments. And again,
all right, Kendall, I'm sorry, we do have to stop here along the network line. We'll let you come back and finish that, but we remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
Our very special guest is Kendall Coffey. We'll continue in a moment.
Here's a special message for those of you who owe the IRS at least $10,000 or more in back taxes. The IRS has special programs in place that could eliminate or reduce your tax debt by thousands of dollars. Call the Federal Tax Management Helpline that has been set up for you, 800-267-1344. Stop the wage garnishments, levies, and tax liens now. Once you've qualified and enrolled, the IRS will stop all the collection activities against you. These unique programs have been allocated to help the economy and significantly reduce or eliminate your tax burden. The IRS is currently accepting reduced settlements and other favorable programs. You may qualify for substantial savings, so get the help you need. If you owe more than $10,000 in taxes, call for free information and to see if you qualify. Take down the number now for the Federal Tax Management Hotline, 800-267-1344. That's 800-267-1344. 800-267-1344.
Florida's boating environment is always changing. New sunsets, new experiences that you won't find anywhere else on Earth. But one thing that never changes, boating while impaired by drugs or alcohol. It's illegal in the state of Florida. Boating under the influence will land you in jail or worse, kill someone you love. It's just simply not a risk worth taking. Learn more about Florida's boating laws at myfwc.com. Brought to you by the FWC Division of Law Enforcement.
Your yard's days of being picked on are over, thanks to the science of Bayer Advanced Brush Killer Plus. Its penetrating formula is specifically designed to kill hard-to-control brush, like kudzu, poison ivy, poison oak, and wild berries, roots and all. And the concentrate product even kills stumps, so your yard never has to worry about being bullied. Bayer Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. BayerAdvanced.com. Always read and follow label directions.
Terrorist acts and shootings are often described as great tragedies. They are not. We live in a world so concerned with being politically correct that they're afraid to call evil what it is, evil. Man's sin nature is as old as the Garden of Eden. Many love to blame culture, poverty, or lack of education and opportunity as the problem. They may have a good or bad impact, but the big problem is sin. Acknowledging our sin nature will show us our need for a Savior who changes us from within. That Savior's name is Jesus. He came to die for the sins of all who will acknowledge their sin. Faith in Him strikes a mighty blow at evil. So quit calling man's evil acts a tragedy. They are evil and God hates it. Yet thankfully He loves us in spite of our evil and sin. Jesus not only forgives us, but gives us the want to overcome evil with good. This is Brian Wright, speaking right from my heart.
All right, crew, let's get her dug.
Honey, you want to give me a hand? I'm planting that tree, remember?
No matter how large or small your digging project may be, no matter how urban or rural, you must always call 811 before any digging project. 811 is our national one-call number, alerting your local utility companies to come out and mark any lines they have near your dig site. You must call 811 at least 2 to 3 business days before any digging project, so you can avoid hitting our essential buried utilities. This includes natural gas and petroleum pipelines, electric, communication cables, and water and sewer lines. So before you do this or this, make sure you do this. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811. Brought to you by Common Ground Alliance.
From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And our very special guest this day is Kendall Coffey, attorney extraordinaire in South Florida. Been there many, many years. He's the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. We were talking, Kendall, about the Federal Judicial Nominating Commission that you serve on, and you were explaining that the state's 2 senators make those appointments, and it goes back and forth between which party occupies the White House as to who gets to appoint the most.
That's exactly right. And it makes perfect sense, and the process has been in place continuously since the 80s. As I mentioned a little earlier, it was originally a bipartisan efforts of Senator Connie Mack and Bob Graham, and Senators Marco Rubio and Bill Nelson have done a magnificent job of maintaining that tradition.
Well, and of course, one of the reasons for going in that direction, we know that you have had some close contact and know the current nominee for the United States Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. You know him pretty well, and we want to talk about that. First off, your relationship with Judge Kavanaugh.
Well, I'd have to say, of course, I'd love to be able to say we're BFFs, and I taught him everything he knows because he's a brilliant guy. But the relationship was brief but fairly intense, because during the Elian Gonzalez case, after we lost the appeal in the federal appeals court, and the appeal really centered on immigration issues and issues of federal agency law. Contacted by his firm, and he and his colleague Jeff Clark volunteered to step forward donating their time, which I'm sure was worth tens and tens of thousands of dollars, a six-figure number, to help our team present the issues to the Supreme Court of the United States. And I never sensed that Brett Kavanaugh had so much of a position on the rights of a father. It wasn't about that. It was really that he was very, very interested in, as now, I think, in the power of federal agencies. And do federal agencies have too much power to decide the law, or should legal issues ultimately be decided by federal judges? And it sounds like an obvious question, an obvious answer, but actually the law has evolved to a point where federal agencies have a lot of discretion and authority to decide for those decisions. And it might surprise a lot of people to know this wasn't a family law decision. It wasn't a best interest decision. It was a decision that applied principles of federal agency law and ultimately held that the federal agency, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, had the legal right to decide whether or not Elian Gonzalez's application was submitted as a legal matter. And so Brett Kavanaugh had seen a recent Supreme Court decision that seemed to be rolling back and reducing the power of agencies to determine federal law. And they did a fabulous job of putting the papers and preparing it and submitting it to the Supreme Court. It was not successful, but I'll be eternally grateful for his and really thought very, very highly of him as an attorney, as a person, as a colleague, even if for a relatively brief period of time.
It seems like that's what a lot of Democrats are actually worried about in his nomination, that he's going to kind of go against a lot of these federal agencies and a lot of the regulations they've been pushing. Do you feel that's something Kavanaugh will do?
Well, he's a conservative jurist, and I suspect that he's obviously going to be aligned more often than not with the other conservative jurists. This issue of agency power to decide the law isn't necessarily a liberal versus conservative issue, but it is one of the things where I think he will line up with the conservative justices. Some of the big questions are in other cases that are very, very controversial. But I think that as we look at what his nomination, and if he's confirmed, what his position on the Supreme Court would mean, it's important to remember that Anthony Kennedy, who he would be replacing if confirmed, was not a liberal or even a centrist justice. He was conservative, and he did establish his own path and his own legacy on some important issues such as same-sex marriage. But, for example, one of the Supreme Court decisions that frustrates Democrats as much or more than anything is the Citizens United case, and that was authored by Justice Kennedy. And when we talk about so-called Obamacare, Justice Kennedy voted to strike it down. It was Chief Justice John Roberts that had the decisive position that ultimately saved Obamacare from various challenges. I mention that just to put in context that we already have a Supreme Court that is, by and large, conservative. I don't disagree that Kavanaugh will have an impact, and he may move it in an even more conservative direction in some respects. But this is not overall a liberal or even a principally centrist Supreme Court.
Now, as this process began, your assessment of how Mr. Kavanaugh is doing thus far, times are changing, and we're seeing lots of different things happen on Capitol Hill that many of us aren't used to seeing. But how do you feel as he's stepping up to the plate here and in the initial meetings and whatnot? How do you think he's doing?
Well, I think he's doing well overall. I think the complicating factor is that he has a lot of paper in his history. He was, of course, one of the leading deputies in the Starr investigation, and a hard-charging deputy at the time, working with Kenneth Starr. Then, of course, he was an attorney with the Bush administration. So you can collect a much more extensive paper history on Brett Kavanaugh than most Supreme Court nominees, and that's before you get to the fact that he was on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals a number of years and had a lot of opinions. I think that by and large, people who meet him are going to be very, very impressed with his personal qualities, with his abilities. But I think one of the things that the Democrats will look at is, and he's not going to answer questions as to how he would vote on Roe versus Wade. Nobody who goes through the process answers those kind of very, very specific questions. But they'll ask him about his work investigating Bill Clinton and articles he wrote after the time of the Clinton investigation, in which he seriously questioned whether it's proper to investigate a sitting president. In other words, Kavanaugh somewhat evolved in his views of the work he had done with Ken Starr to the point where he really questioned whether it was good for the country to investigate a sitting president. Given the current dynamic, given the pending investigations that we all read about every day, that line of analysis and commentary by Judge Kavanaugh is going to get a lot of attention.
What did you think of what happened under the Obama administration when Obama had, nominated Eric Garland and the Republicans refused to even have the hearings? Do you think that was, within the Republicans' right, or do you think maybe that was bad for the country?
I thought it was wrong, to me, I have a lot of respect for the basic elements of the system, which say that a president was democratically elected. In that case, Barack Obama. The Constitution says he gets to make these choices. He picks the Supreme Court justices, and to just sit and do nothing on it was wrong. That's not what the Constitution provides. The Constitution provides that they're supposed to vote on it.
Yeah, and as we have seen in the past, certainly during the Nixon years and again in the Reagan years, it is possible for the majority party in the Senate to pull together and vote a candidate down or make them so miserable that their name is withdrawn.
Absolutely. Nothing in the Constitution would have required a Republican majority to confirm Merrick Garland. But to simply be missing in action and to walk off the job for political reasons doesn't seem right to me.
And I'll tell you what, Kendall, at that point, we have to pause again along our network line. Let us remind folks that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And our very special guest this day is a South Florida attorney extraordinaire, Kendall Coffey. We'll continue in a moment.
Are you or a loved one turning or about to turn 65? Then now's the time to start thinking about your health care needs, specifically Medicare. If you're new to Medicare, there are a lot of options to choose from, and the whole process can be confusing. But the licensed insurance agents at Easy Medicare can help you find the right Medicare plan based on your budget and health care needs. Call Easy Medicare today and they'll guide you through the process. Whether you're completely new to it all or looking to improve on an existing Medicare Advantage or Medicare Supplement plan, Easy Medicare can help you find a plan that best suits you and your health care needs. Visit easymedicare.com/radio. EasyMedicare.com is a non-government site. It is an affiliate of eTelequote Insurance, Inc., a private licensed representative of Medicare insurance organizations with a Medicare contract. Sales agents may be compensated based on your enrollment in a health plan. Receiving quotes through our website and from our licensed insurance agents is always free, and you're under no obligation to purchase any services.
800-957-6213. 800-957-6213. That's 800-957-6213.
A pretty common problem in our area is black and green stuff on outdoor surfaces. You scrub it off and it comes right back. You need something that will keep it clean. Wet and Forget. It keeps surfaces clean for a year or more. Just spray it on and leave it. Make cleaning easier. Pick up a bottle of Wet and Forget today at Walmart, Ace, Do It Best, or visit wetandforget.com to find a store near you.
Floridians love boating with family and friends, exploring our state's amazing waterways. But even experienced boaters can lose sight of the risks of passengers standing or sitting in improper locations. Bow riding by passengers of any age is extremely dangerous. Be sure that passengers only sit or stand in designated areas while underway. Their safety is your responsibility. Safe boating is no accident. To learn more, visit the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission at myfwc.com.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
Our very special guest this day is Kendall Coffey. He is a practicing attorney in South Florida. He has been the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He is on the Federal Judicial Nominating Committee and involved in all kinds of things. And Kendall, before I forget, we want to say thank you for spending all of this time with us today. We know how busy you are, and our deepest gratitude for spending this much time with us. It's certainly a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for including me.
On the Justice Kavanaugh thing now, as you watch and you look at the documents and whatnot, and you have many, many years of experience under your belt, and having worked with him during that Elian Gonzalez period, what is your gut feeling? Should he be nominated, and is he still got that same character that you respected and liked many years ago?
Well,
what's your feeling?
I think he's an exemplary guy. I do have a different legal philosophy. So, for someone from my perspective, Merrick Garland was a great choice. So, I'm a Democrat. We lost the election. The president gets to pick. That's the Constitution, which we all revere and respect. And from the president's political philosophy and standpoint, I don't think he could have made a better choice.
Do you think he will be confirmed? Do you think that there are going to be maybe a couple of Democrat senators that vote to confirm him?
You couldn't begin to count all the times I've been wrong about political developments in the last year and a half.
You and me both.
but it does seem to me, at least, likely that he'll be confirmed for just the qualities he has. I don't think they're going to pull anything that's a separate issue other than his service with the Starr investigation and his subsequent opinions on that. His opinions are all written, well reasoned. Many of them are conservative, but I don't see him being derailed. Although I could see, given the extensive history that he has, much of which is documented, and the roles he served along the way, I think there could be a lot of questions asked that could affect the timing of the confirmation.
None of these things is ever set in stone, and people change. They get on the court. The top of my list comes the name Felix Frankfurter. Let us look in the crystal ball and say we presume that Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed. He gets on there. Do you see him essentially hewing to the man that you know and worked with several years ago? As in other words, I guess where I'm going with that is, what do you see as his impact on the court overall if he gets on there?
Well, this is rank speculation, but I would say just from the evolution that he demonstrated with respect to the issue of the Ken Starr investigation and the complete Clinton impeachment, where he looked back and said maybe that wasn't such a good thing after all for the country, it tells me he's a person with the intellectual capacity and the decency to be able to evolve. So he's a conservative judge now, for sure. But the Supreme Court justices have just a qualitatively different job than anybody else in the country. And, of course, they're applying the law and reading the cases and the statutes. But everyone understands what their ultimate role is in a democracy. So I certainly don't exclude the possibility that he will continue to evolve for reasons that I cannot explain or justify. I think he will connect very well with his colleagues and perhaps with the Chief Justice John Roberts. The Chief Justice has a very clear sense of not only his view of the law, but the role of the Supreme Court in our country and the importance of the Supreme Court maintaining its credibility and the fact that people look up to it and admire its justices as having the last say, basically, on all issues of law. And I emphasize that because there's a lot of discussion about Roe versus Wade and what would a conservative jurist like Brett Kavanaugh have to say about it. And to me, it's possible, and no one knows at this point, that much like Justice Anthony Kennedy, a conservative jurist would look at Roe versus Wade and say, I would have never voted for that in the first place. But it's one thing to disagree with a judicial precedent. It's another thing to erase it after so many years. And so, in my mind at least, Brett Kavanaugh is going to be inclined on the conservative side, but is going to be capable of taking a broad view of things and a view ultimately of the Supreme Court as an institution and being the bedrock of our constitutional system.
What do you think threatens the credibility of the court, if anything?
Changing its mind. I think that it's legitimate, and of course, Brown versus Board of Education, one of the most important decisions in history, the Supreme Court changed its mind after many years and declared that separate is not equal. But I think, for example, a Supreme Court decision that says in so many words, okay, now we've got a really strong conservative majority. Let's go around and start rearranging the furniture and let's turn the house upside down. I think that would detract from the Supreme Court's credibility. The other thing is, of course, when the Supreme Court appears to be involved in what are political issues, such as, of course, the Bush versus Gore case, where the Supreme Court chose to shut down the recount that was underway in Florida, or Citizens United, although Citizens United was ultimately a constitutional decision based on the First Amendment, it nevertheless appeared to many, many people in the public that the Supreme Court had decided to change the rules with respect to campaign financing. So those are the areas where the Supreme Court's credibility can be undermined.
And, Kendall, unfortunately, we are at that point in time where the clock is catching up with us here. We really didn't hardly even get to touch on your participation in the controversial election of 2000, one of the most controversial in United States history. But, again, let me say thank you for all your time this day, and we would like to invite you to come back. Maybe when we can devote a whole program to that carrying on in 2000. The Florida Chief Justice wrote a book on it and was here in the studio, and we would love to go exploring through that with you. But again, thank you for all your time this day, sir.
Oh, and thank you.
All right, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And Mike and I have a very brief closing thought following these messages.
Have you written a book? You can become a published author with Dorrance Publishing, the nation's oldest publishing services company. Countless authors have trusted Dorrance for nearly 100 years to bring their book to the market. Our professional team will edit your text, design your book pages, and create an appealing, eye-catching custom cover. Plus, our authors benefit from a custom book promotion marketing campaign that makes your book available where people buy books, like Amazon and brick-and-mortar bookstores. So make this free free call right now to claim your free author's guide to publishing. Don't wait another day. Take one step closer to realizing your dream of becoming a published author and seeing your name in print. You've already written a book, so the next thing to do is make this free call right now to Dorrance Publishing and get your free guide to publishing. Call right now.
800-485-6003. 800-485-6003. That's 800-485-6003.
Wow, your flowers are gorgeous. What's your secret?
It's no secret. It's Bear Advanced.
You mean these blue bottles?
Uh-huh. I protect my beauties with all-in-one rose and flower care. It's insect and disease control plus fertilizer.
Really? What's this 12-month tree and shrub protect and feed?
Oh, I use it on my trees. It kills bugs for up to a year, plus it feeds. It's that easy. Hey, where are you going?
To get my own. I want a great yard, too.
Bear Advanced. Get more from the Blue Bottle. Always read and follow label instructions.
Unexpected expenses can hit anyone, and many Floridians turn to small dollar loans to manage those temporary financial challenges. When using a small dollar loan, be sure to choose a state licensed lender. Remember that borrowers have rights under Florida law, including flexible repayment options if you can't repay on time. Make sure you understand the cost and terms of the loan before you borrow, and only borrow what you can afford to pay back. For more information, go to borrowsmartfl.com. This message is brought to you by the Florida Community Financial Services Association.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Employ Florida offers resources and services to help you find employment.
Hi, Gary here. Employ Florida helped me improve my interview skills, plus write a great resume. I attended networking events with many employers and other industry professionals just like me. With the workshops and training found at employflorida.com, I was able to land a great job in my field.
Job resources, real results, hired. Employflorida.com. That's employflorida.com.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And Michael, I don't know about you, I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Kendall Coffey. He's a very, very intelligent man, and the background that he brings to the nominating commission, I think, is stellar, you know.
Not only that, but it's really interesting to talk to someone who knows Brett Kavanaugh personally.
Yes.
So it gives a different perspective on someone who's most likely going to be the next Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I agree with you. Unless there is some sort of bombshell that somebody's holding back on,
right.
I don't see his nomination being derailed at all. And I could see 2 or 3 of the Democrat senators coming over, especially Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And the lady from North Dakota.
The big one.
Yeah. I think there are 2 or 3 of them that could cross the line and do that. Michael, before we go, you have a couple of other venues that you're talking along.
Yes. So what you want to do is search Beyond Reason Radio on your iHeartRadio app or on iTunes. I do my show where I talk faith, culture, and politics. You can also follow me on Twitter at BeyondReasonR.
All right. In the weeks ahead, of course, the general election coming up in November, and it'll be on top of us before we know it. And as we go along, Mike and I be taking a look at what is going on statewide in that one. And as always, I think sometimes we forget to say thank you for your time. Mike and I know you have lots and lots of choices out there, and he and I are delighted when you're here with us. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
See you again next week.
You've been listening to the Florida Roundtable, a news and public affairs presentation of the Florida News Network. The views and opinions expressed during this show are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's management, ownership, or sponsors. Please email your comments to reagansmith@fnnonline.net.